Okay, so right now it looks like we have 13 people in the room and we are expecting about 30. So like I said, I'm going to wait just about another, let's say, I want to honor your time. So maybe 30 seconds, and then we can get started this morning. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? My name is Casey Courts. I'm a digital learning specialist with BPS Technology, and I'm very fortunate to be joined this morning by my colleague, Sarah Chang. Sarah, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Casey. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Chang. I'm an instructional coach with the digital learning team. I'm really excited to see you all here today, really excited about using a flipped classroom approach. So welcome.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. So this webinar is being closed captioned. If you want to go ahead and access the captioning, there's a live transcript view. If you go down to your black Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to enable the captions from the live transcript button. It might be in the More button all the way over to the right, but you can go ahead and enable those captions. And just some points of housekeeping. This session is being recorded, so do know you'll be able to come back to this. We will send out the recording. I'll send it out later today. So do know you'll be able to access that. Just in terms of keeping the session moving and minimizing background noise, if we can mute ourselves unless you have a question, feel free to unmute at any point if you do have a question. Though I will note here that we do have a parking lot available for unanswered questions. If there's something that you either don't want to unmute or it occurs to you later, even after the session, please feel free to use the parking lot as a resource. And Sarah, would you mind throwing that in the chat? Oh, there she is. It's like I don't even have, it's just automatic. Fabulous. Thank you. So there's a link in the chat from Sarah. And that's where, if you want to go ahead and type any questions in there, one of the wonderful things about being joined by my colleague Sarah this morning is that it's two sets of eyes and expertise. So we'll be able to both take a look at that, especially if I'm not looking directly at that document right now. Sarah can keep an eye on it as well. And then I feel like it looks as if most of us are using our names in Zoom, which is fabulous. So, but if you haven't already, there's a 3-dot menu. If you mouse over your image in Zoom, if you click on that, you'll be able to rename yourself. So again, just a reminder about the parking lot. It's here if you want to go ahead and leave a question there. But in terms of our agenda for this morning, obviously, first, we wanted to welcome you to the session. We want to do a little bit of an introduction to the concept of flipped classroom. After that, we're going to do a jigsaw activity and take a sort of a deeper dive look at 4 different flipped classroom models. And when I say 4 different models, there are so many models of flipped classroom. When I started doing more research into this topic, 4 is just sort of skimming the sort of the top of the iceberg here. So we'll take a look at 4 models, but I would encourage you, if this is something that you're interested in possibly implementing, to do more research independently as well, because there are many more than just the 4 models. But in the interest of time, we only have an hour together this morning. We'll take a look at those 4. In terms of next steps, we'll talk about some different tools, specifically some tech tools you might use if you're considering implementing a flipped classroom model. And then, of course, we will have dedicated Q&A time, but I also want you to know, just as a reminder, we do have that parking lot, and you can always reach out to me after the session concludes. I'm more than happy to continue the conversation then. And before I move forward, I wanted to just sort of give a little bit of a rationale for today's session. So as we all know, a few years ago, our lives were turned upside down by COVID. We went remote. All of the kids were learning on Chromebooks. And it was actually just around that same time that the district was interested in moving toward a one-to-one model, which is to say that students would have access to technology, to Chromebooks for their educational purposes. And so initially, we were using those Chromebooks as sort of, a lifeline, right? That this was literally how they were accessing their education. But now, we've returned to the classroom. Over the course of last year, we're obviously going to be fully in person in just a couple weeks. And so, it occurred to me, and I know my colleagues on the digital learning team have given a lot of thought to this as well, of sort of how can we use not only the Chromebooks that students have become so accustomed to using, but also all the different tech tools that all of us, whether we're teachers or students, how can we kind of leverage these in ways that, we learned a lot over the last few years. We learned a lot of things, sort of to do, and maybe, things we don't want to do. But we don't want these to sort of become doorstops, right? Like we want to be able to use the Chromebooks thoughtfully. And so this is a way that we might think about using the technology, that we have access to sort of in this new normal that we find ourselves in. So that's part of what kind of encouraged or sort of germinated this idea in my mind of wanting to think about the flipped classroom model. So thinking about sort of what is flipped classroom, I pulled this definition from the Bok Center at Harvard. And, it's really just, I'm not going to read the slide to you, but it's really just structured around the idea of having students doing more of the kind of nuts and bolts of like learning the actual sort of, ABCs of learning at home, and then thinking about class time is where they're actually kind of iterating off of that, working out issues, asking questions, making that more of sort of like the active learning time, using those higher order thinking skills. And this sort of approach came to be about 15 years ago or so. There's an educator in Colorado named Aaron Sams. And he really came up with this approach and ran with it at his school. And since then, it has been iterated off of numerous times and in numerous ways. Like I mentioned, there are multiple models of the flipped classroom. And while, Aaron Sams is the one who really is credited with coming up with the concept, there's a fantastic educator whom you're probably familiar with named Caitlin Tucker, who actually put together a fantastic video, I think, modeling what the flipped classroom could look like. And so we're going to take a look at that in a moment. And before we move on, I'm curious, are there any of you in this group today who are actually already using this model? I'm seeing a shaking head from Cheryl. Anybody else? If you want to unmute or type in the chat, I'd be curious to know. And I'm seeing some. All right. Caitlin is saying, nope. Stephanie, not consistently. No, I haven't. No, not currently. Okay, this is great. Wonderful. I just didn't want to start talking about this topic and not kind of, tap the wisdom in the room. Francisca's never heard of it. Fabulous. Okay. So I think we've all come to the right place. Wonderful. So what I'm going to do at this point is what I'd like to share with you a short video, like I mentioned, of Caitlin Tucker, who does a lot with blended learning, which is to say doing some of the work sort of in person, some of it online in a classroom context. She's written a few books on the concept of blended learning, but she does, I think, a nice piece on the flipped classroom, and then we'll pause and kind of reflect on what she does here. It might not apply to all of our contexts, but I like how it's sort of modeled here. So I'm just going to pull this up. Give me just a moment. And I have it embedded in the slide deck, but what I'd prefer in terms of the quality of the audio and videos, I actually have it pulled up in my browser. So I'm just going to get that for us. Give me just a moment. And let me know if this sound is okay for everybody. No? Okay. Give me just a moment here. All right, let's try this one more time.
Today's lesson begins with me circulating around the room to check the students' notes on a flipped vocabulary lesson that they watched for homework. So my students don't get any direct instruction on vocabulary, writing, or grammar from me in the classroom. Instead, they watch videos that I've created for them at home. So we're going to talk about how do you use each of these words and how can you test yourself to make sure you've actually used the correct word. So looking at who is a subjective pronoun. I underline.
Is this not working?
Oh, sorry. I think your Zoom chat screen is now blocking
Oh,
the video.
sorry about that. It just popped up. Was the audio okay though?
The audio is okay. And then there's also a little black box at the bottom that might be like your toolbar or something.
You know what? It is my captions. So what I'll do is I'll turn off my captions. Thank you.
Perfect. Looks good.
Okay, let's try it again. Should I start from the beginning? Here, I'll pull it back to the beginning.
Today's lesson begins with me circulating around the room to check the students' notes on a flipped vocabulary lesson that they watched for homework. So my students don't get any direct instruction on vocabulary, writing, or grammar from me in the classroom. Instead, they watch videos that I've created for them at home. So we're going to talk about how do you use each of these words and how can you test yourself to make sure you've actually used the correct word. So looking at who is a subjective pronoun. I underlined the word subject in subjective because we use who when it is the subject of a clause or a sentence.
In other cases, we would get a worksheet and my experience in the past, and then you'd read over the instructions and try to do it yourself. But here, it is not like you are you're doing that. You're going over a video, you're taking notes on it, and as the video progresses, you practice it with a peer. So it's not just you doing the work, and it is easier that way for me.
I really don't lecture to students or at students anymore. I'm not a big fan of lecture. I definitely lectured in the first 5-6 years of my teaching career, and then once I started to play with the flipped classroom model, I realized there was a lot more benefit to me presenting information when students could really digest that information at their own pace, pause a video, rewind it, and then if I'm ever tempted to stand up in front of the class and tell them something, so let's say I want to talk about Shakespearean sonnets. For me, I turn those moments into potential crowdsourcing activities where I might write Shakespearean sonnets on the board or have something projected, but then I want them to grab their devices, I want them to do Google searches, have conversations, and then crowdsource the information they're finding as opposed to me giving them the information.
Previously, all my other English teachers would just lecture the whole period about it, whereas Miss Tucker will have us watch these videos either in class as a rotation or at home for homework, and then we come to class and discuss about them if we don't understand anything.
I think the flipped classroom is so popular because it's so easy to conceptualize in some ways. I really want teachers not to be so focused on the video and be more focused on how are you flipping and engaging students around that information, and then what are we doing with class time to get students to really creatively apply the information they're learning at home. So what pieces did you use to support your point?
Is that she said they're basically being mocked by the government, by them hearing about how free everyone else is, but not being able to enjoy those freedoms themselves.
Excellent. Anything else?
Yeah.
So when I designed my own videos, my videos are literally screencasts of presentations, multimedia presentations that I've put together on Google Slides. So for vocabulary, on one slide is the word, the part of speech, and the definition, and on the next slide is an image, something that I hope will help them remember that word. And then as I'm talking through the word, I'm pronouncing it, detailing the part of speech, kind of breaking down the definition, then I get to the image and I talk through the image and explain how it relates to the word and give examples, often from my own life or experiences, which kids totally get a kick out of.
You may deviate from
the plan that your parents have for your future and actually choose your own road and go your own direction and deviate from what everybody else wants you to do or thinks you should do. But if they watch videos that have been created, I think you just get a better sense of what you actually want to do yourself. One misconception is that the flipped classroom, you have to flip with video, and that's not the case. I think you can do a really dynamic flip with images. So having students go on like a virtual museum tour or analyze and discuss a really complicated infographic, or even with text, if you're using something like StudySync where they can use an annotation tool, they can look up words, they can make notes about what they're reading, then text can be a dynamic flip too. So I hate when the conversation is myopically focused on videos, because videos really isn't the only way to flip a classroom.
Okay. So let me just go ahead and pull this back up here. Okay, so now that we've watched this video and it's sort of Caitlin Tucker's view. Oh, nope, didn't mean to do that. Of the flipped classroom, I'm curious, what are people thinking in terms of what, like, sort of what was interesting or intriguing about the video? What challenges do you foresee? What sort of, ideas did it spark for you? And feel free to use the chat or to unmute your microphones to think about this.
For me, I think my concern would be like, okay, so if you flip your classroom, but the students aren't doing the necessary pre-work, right, what does that look like the next day? Do you then reteach it? Are they still responsible during class? And then like, what does that also look like, grading wise?
Right. Right. I think that's a great point. So that concern about what does this look like in terms of the practicality of if people aren't doing what they need to do to prepare. I thought about that as well. And I wondered if it would be sort of along the lines of, sort of a learning curve, which is to say this is such a massive shift, I think, in terms for many of us of how we would sort of run our classes. What, sort of acclimating to that, right? So maybe we don't do it every day, but getting students sort of in that kind of groove. But I really appreciate that. Thank you. Anybody else have thoughts?
I do have a few comments in the chat, Casey.
Awesome. My chat is being entertaining, so I'm trying to pull it up.
Sure, I could read.
Great. Okay, so I'm seeing them now. Thank you. So great, wonderful. I see. I like the concept a lot, but as a speech therapist, I don't see how more than a handful of my students doing the pre. Okay, so similar idea. Thank you, Caitlin. The struggling with the pre-work. Francisca talks about the pros being flexibility, a different entry point. I'd love to hear more about that. More time to confer with individual students. Mary echoing, what if students don't come prepared? Stephanie talked about liking the idea of seeing the vocabulary lesson. Thinking about special education students. So honestly, I see this applying to all students. I think it would be such a shift, in terms of our approach to classwork that it could be quite different. I love Melissa says the use of visuals, video is helpful for English language learners. Absolutely. And then Rebecca asked a great question. What age is this geared for? I think that, there are sort of use cases for for flipped classroom across all of the different ages. So I think that, you know, in Catlin Tucker's case, obviously we're looking at an older group, but I don't think that's the case, you know, across the board. This is supposed to be, you know, an approach that could work with students, you know, probably from, you know, 1st through 12th, but obviously the outside of, you know, thinking about the work outside the classroom would have to be, you know, geared very differently for the younger kids. Absolutely.
Casey, if I could hop in for a moment, I know a lot of people have been wondering about what happens if the students don't do the work at home or don't come prepared.
Great.
And one, you know, further on, we'll get into those 4 models that we're going to
Mhm.
explore a little bit more, but sometimes you can consider setting up a station in preparation that, you know, some students are not going to come prepared with it. So having a station with Chromebooks where they do look at the content during class for a small group of students who aren't prepared, while you set up other stations or other activities in anticipation that you are going to have students who haven't completed the work at home. So that's one possible idea, but there, it talks a little bit more about that in the 4 models that we're going to go through.
Thank you. And I feel like, thank you so much for raising that, Sarah. I think that in particular, actually, she touches on that, Catlin Tucker touches on that a bit when she talks about the stations that she uses in her classroom, specifically around video. And I like that she also specifies that this doesn't have to be video based. And so I wanted to share with you these 4 models that that we wanted to do a deeper dive into today. And the 4 models that we really want to look at in particular are, first, the conventional flip, which is very similar to what Catlin Tucker talks about in her model, the in-class flip, the group-based flip, and something that's called the flip teacher, also referred to as the double flipped. And so what we'd like to do at this point is to break into 4 different breakout groups and have you look at each of these models. So we'll look at 1 model per group. And what we'd love to do is a jigsaw approach, so that, you know, when we divide into these groups, we'll think about how do each of these approaches address the advantages and the concerns that we just talked about, and how might each of these approaches be applied at different grade levels or for different subjects. Because I think that what you're surfacing here is absolutely right, that some of these are going to work really well for older students, not as well for younger students, and vice versa. And so we're going to take a moment now to break into those groups. And then what we can do is maybe group A looks at the conventional flip, group B looks at the, you know, the in-class flip, group C can look at the group-based flip, and then group D can look at the flipped classroom. And it looks as if, have you already created those groups, Sarah?
I created them.
Oh
I
my
created them
gosh.
for you.
Sarah, you're just the best. Thank you so much.
You're
So let's take a look at these now. So should we have people join their own groups, or are we assigning? How do we want to do this?
So I've set it up so that people can choose their own rooms, but if
Awesome.
we want to try to keep it, you know, kind of the same number per group, kind of up to you, Casey.
Yeah, if we could try to, it looks as if we have, I'm looking at the numbers here, and I will let you know, my camera, for whatever reason, has sort of gone out, so I'm not able to see it. My menu seems to be really going haywire today, so I'm not seeing everybody, and the chat is being intermittent. But what I would say is it looks as if we have 22 people in the room. So if we want to do, it's going to be roughly 6 people in each group. So if you could try to join a group and have it be 6 people per, so if you see 8 people in a group, if you could try not to join that group. And if we could have group A do the conventional flip, group B, the in-class flip, group C, the group-based flip, and group D, the flip teacher. And what we'd love, again, is for you to explore that model, but then also really consider the questions that we've posted here. So how do each of these approaches address the advantages, concerns we talked about? and how might each of these be applied at different grade levels or for different subjects. So has the slide deck been shared? Because I can go ahead and post that here as well so that people have access to these resources.
I just put it in the chat. Casey.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. So then I think right now it's 10:26. Maybe we can take 10 minutes on this. So we can go into our groups and come back at 10:36 and then we can share out. So I'm seeing, let's see, a couple people in the conventional flip. And if anyone needs help joining a group, please let us know in the chat and we can definitely help you. Okay, Rebecca, I can go ahead and put you in that room.
And Sarah Granfield, I can put you in a room too if you let me know which one you want to go into. Okay, I'll put you in A, Sarah.
Okay, April, I will put you in a room.
Can you put me in the group-based flip, please?
Who is that?
Cheryl,
Cheryl, absolutely.
thanks.
No problem.
And Caitlin, which room do you want to go into?
It looks like Caitlin's fine with any room. I'm going to
Okay.
put her in flip teacher.
Sounds good.
And Christine, do you have a preference of a room?
Hi, I'm not sure how to get in.
That's okay. Which room would you like to go into?
I hit the conventional flip.
Okay, Christine, I'll put you in there, okay?
Oh, thank you. Sorry.
Oh, no, don't apologize. Okay, Sarah,
Yes.
hold on for just a moment. Wonderful. It's great to have you all coming back from the rooms. Are you seeing the slide deck right now, taking up the whole screen?
Yes.
Sarah, great.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And I know since your Zoom is being wonky, not everybody is back yet, but
Great.
they're making their way back.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I believe everybody is back now.
Wonderful. So if we want to start with, we'll just go down the line, the conventional flip group. If you could sort of talk us through what the conventional flip is and what you're thinking in terms of whether this approach addresses the concerns and the advantages we talked about earlier, and then whether you think this conventional flip model would work for different grade levels for different subjects. And I would welcome you to unmute, or if you want to type in the chat. As Sarah was alluding to a moment ago, I'm having some very interesting Zoom challenges this morning, but I'd love to hear from all of you, and Sarah might have to help me kind of narrate the chat since it has disappeared for me. So anybody from the conventional flip group? Are we,
Okay.
sorry,
Oh.
go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I'll do it. All right.
Great.
So conventional flip is when you send home assignments, labs, tests, or homework assignments to your students. Then they do them at home, and then you come in and you can move forward with the work. And I think that the concerns that we had a few concerns
Mhm.
if someone was unable to access the technology.
Yes.
Ability, younger children would need family support to do this. Would they have? And maybe with older children, if they're confused and are not sure what to do, where do they turn for help?
I think those are fantastic questions. And I think what Sarah was alluding to earlier, which I think Catlin Tucker she touches on briefly in that video, is the idea of like maybe a station rotation model, because I think your point about accessing technology at home and not having that maybe guidance at home, maybe consistently or across all students is a point really well taken. And I think this applies to younger students as well as older students. And so thinking about maybe using that station rotation model where maybe students are accessing the content in kind of like a rotation setup where you have different stations in the room to either, watch a short video or look at, images, or to do a piece of reading, and maybe getting some support there could really go a long way with that. But I think your points are really well taken. Thank you for sharing. Does anyone want to talk about the second, the in-class flip?
Sure.
Awesome.
It was pretty much what you were saying. So it was the station rotation. I think it's kind of like a mix of the best of all of it, because the students get
Right.
it at school, they get support. They can go back and forth the way they were showing the different stations. So even if
Right.
you could reinforce and go back and listen to the video again, and then go back to the station where you're supposed to be answering the questions. And you have the teacher floating around because they've already recorded everything, so they don't have to be at that station. They can go from station to station.
Right.
So I thought it worked pretty well with, I'm in a full inclusion school, so they kind of already do this. So as
Mhm.
an OT, I would come in and just go from station to station with my student
Mhm.
and give them the extra support that they would need to get through it.
It's fantastic. Thank you for sort of walking through the in-class flip. And I think seeing that as sort of the second model right next to the conventional is really helpful, because I think you're right, it does address a lot of those concerns. And particularly now that we are a district that has access to all of these different the Chromebooks that we can use as stations in class, this could be really helpful. I see there's a comment in the chat. Unfortunately, I cannot access it. I don't know if I'm missing anything. Sarah, if you'd want to jump in.
Cherno, hi Cherno. He just wanted to comment and say that the in-class flip worked well with his 12th grade students.
Oh, great.
But they received many complaints from the grade 9 students. And I don't know, Cherno, do you want to elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah, I'd love to hear more
like,
about that.
Yeah,
you
sure. But again, I didn't teach grade 9, but I'm the math department chair. And I know that students, did complain to our school leaders about just this not working for them. They needed the teacher more. And probably, I wasn't in the classroom to see what's happening, but my only take is maybe not to have an over-reliance on this, that this is not probably something you do every day in a grade 9 classroom. And also, I don't know how much even collaboration was happening, like having students work in a small group as opposed to using videos that was recorded for pandemic purposes and then just, adapting it to a flipped classroom.
Right.
So I want to have those conversations with my department, and hopefully we will find something that's going to work for those grade 9 students.
Great. Thank you for elaborating. I think that's really helpful to hear. And this could work very well for, certain grade levels and certain subjects, and maybe not as well for others. And maybe it's something sort of like we talked about a few minutes ago, that this is something that is implemented maybe over time, or maybe it's for a particular unit. It might not be the, sort of be all end all for for the whole school year. And maybe for other teachers and subjects, it would be. So really trying to sort of like try it out and see. But I think that someone spoke to the idea of, home support as well. And I feel like that would be pretty key, particularly if you're thinking about this from a conventional perspective and not the in-class flip. So, I think these are all points really well taken. What about the group-based flip? And I think, this was sort of touched on a moment ago, and I apologize that I can't see your name. I'm flying a bit blind this morning with my Zoom, but you talked about, I think you alluded to this a bit, that the group-based flip might actually be a little more helpful if students were doing this sort of in groups. But I'd love to hear from that particular Jigsaw group and hear about the group-based flip and sort of, what advantages and concerns you see there.
I thought of this one being helpful in terms of the younger students who needed more support using technology.
Great.
We had a group of mostly related service providers, and maybe this wasn't the best tool for the related service providers or the group being the best method, but being aware if your teachers are using it so that you can be on board with them when you walk in the room, as Irene had mentioned, in an inclusion environment.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And so thinking about this as a particular model, perhaps for younger learners, I can see that there are comments in the chat. Tragically, I can't read them, but I don't know if anybody wants to unmute or say more.
Yeah, we're just having some agreeing comments from Melissa.
Awesome.
Says she agrees with Jennifer.
Thank you.
I agree also. And I'm Patty. I'm a speech pathologist, bilingual Spanish.
Hi, Patty.
So I feel like, hi, good morning. I feel like the teachers that are using this model and or on a difficult or challenging topic that we really could go in the classroom and help out. And especially, it's nice to know just what this even is, defining it, and just some examples and different ways that we could change the lessons to accommodate our students who need the speech and language services or other services as well.
Wonderful.
But I think it is going to be going in the classroom, or even if it's not an inclusion classroom.
Right.
So.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And so last but not least, the flipped teacher model, also known as the double flipped. Does anyone want to speak to this?
I can jump in.
Great.
So the idea is that students are now generating materials where there are sort of reinforcing and demonstrating their understanding of the content by creating the kind of stuff that you might create for a flipped classroom, whether it's a video or something else. And it has the added benefit of teaching students the technology skills and integrating those more seamlessly in what you're doing. Personally, I have I've read into, you have the whole gamut of how tech savvy your students are. So you may have to do some direct instruction around that and create some support around those things. And so sometimes doing some group work with that kind of stuff is helpful when you have kids who are arranged. Then I would see this working better with older students. With younger students, there are certainly like tools that can help you do this, whether it's a Flipgrid or something else that has them, using the technology to respond to things. But I think I don't work with younger students myself, but someone in our group mentioned Seesaw lets you record videos or record videos. So you can have them doing those kinds of things in very small, low-key ways as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Was that Stephanie?
Yes, nice to see you.
Hi, Stephanie. I recognize your voice. I cannot see anyone, and I have no idea why. So, but I thought I recognized your voice. So what I would say to that is yes, and I want to come back to something that Caitlin Tucker said in her video that really resonated with me. And I know, we are on the digital learning team, but I do think it's important to keep in mind that this doesn't necessarily have to be done, sort of as a video. And so what's so powerful about the flip teacher model, or the double flip model, I think, is having students become almost like subject matter experts, right? And obviously work needs to be done to empower students to feel as if they can be those experts, to develop that expertise in a particular topic. But even for our younger learners, even if it's not using technology, but being able to demonstrate in class, whether it's maybe they create a visual and they're able to talk through a particular concept or idea. This could be done really with markers and paper. It doesn't necessarily have to be technology based. Certainly, and I think Stephanie's absolutely right, there are tech tools that our younger learners can leverage, like Seesaw. And I know that we will have webinars later in the week, particularly around Seesaw. The artist formerly known as Flipgrid, now it's Flip. And I know Sarah can speak more to that. Nearpod, there are a bunch of different tools that can be used that way. But I just think keeping in mind that, that expertise can be built and demonstrated in sort of, more low tech ways too. So thank you so much for sharing these. I'd want to think, and I know that we're getting short on time, but before we close, I wanted to make sure that you had the opportunity to consider this idea of, do you have lessons sort of in your toolbox that you have, taught before? I know Stephanie mentioned, I know in the chat when I could still see it, about the idea of amending prior vocabulary lessons, and thinking about them more from a flipped classroom perspective. Are there alterations that you would need to make in order to make, sort of an existing lesson a successful flip lesson? Thinking about which model you might use and why, and then also what dilemmas do you immediately see? And I know we've talked a lot about the ones of sort of, the sort of the pain points of getting to the point where you would feel comfortable using a model like this with students, getting families on board, that sort of thing. And so maybe just taking a minute to think about this. This can obviously be a longer conversation. If you want to talk offline about this, we will have office hours later in the week. But I just wanted to sort of at least plant this seed. And if anybody wants to unmute their microphones or type in the chat about a lesson that they're thinking about, maybe sort of reconfiguring or reimagining based on the flipped classroom model, I'd love to hear more about that. And I can see the chats are happening. I just can't read them.
So Jennifer just shared that she's thinking of using Flipgrid, now known as Flip, to push out a fine motor home program on back to school night.
Interesting. I'd love to hear more about that if you want to unmute, but no pressure.
She's shaking her head no.
Okay. That's fine. Thank you for sharing. So as promised, I wanted to make sure that we mentioned some tools, and some of these have already been talked about, like Flip and Nearpod, but we've linked to 4 tools that we felt like could be really helpful to get started with the concept of a flipped classroom. Nearpod, I don't know how many people are familiar with Nearpod, but it's an interactive tool that you can use to essentially engage students with sort of gamified quizzes. You can embed polls. There's a lot of fun sort of activities you can add to a lesson that could really kind of create that interesting learning piece for either at home or in person with Nearpod. And we do have webinars on Nearpod. I was actually looking at our schedule tomorrow, Wednesday, and Thursday this week. So if you're interested in learning more about Nearpod, we'll definitely share the links to our the sort of calendar of all of our events for this week. And I know that my colleague Sarah, who is here with us obviously today, she's doing a webinar on Flip on Wednesday. And Sarah, I don't know if you want to say a few words about Flip, or I can just do a quick summary.
Yeah, so Flip, formerly known as Flipgrid, you can create topics for students to respond to via video. And it has a lot of kind of video quick video editing feature. So if they can just record their voice or they can type on the screen or whatnot, but it gives a lot of, opens up a lot of possibilities with getting students to respond to something and also respond to each other's work. So it's kind of a fun little tool that I'm going to talk more about on Wednesday.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. And then the Screencastify and QuickTime are two tools that you can use to record your screen. And so Catlin Tucker in her video talks about creating screencasts where she talks through whether it's a series of Google Slides that she did for her vocabulary lesson, or if let's say she wanted to walk through something else on her screen. You can use both of those tools, especially if you're using one of your, like an L for L, you can use QuickTime to record your screen, or Screencastify is a Chrome extension that you can use to just record your screen. Your face can appear or not as you sort of talk through sort of what's happening on the screen. So, all four of these can be really powerful tools to consider as you're thinking about amending a lesson or maybe creating a whole new lesson from the flipped classroom perspective. And then something we wanted to make sure we shared, and Sarah, thank you for reminding me to include this. This is really important. For those of us who want to share this with our students, there are some free and low-cost home internet options. If our students are not aware of these are all resources that are available to our BPS students. And we have a link here from the slide deck if people are interested in following up on any of these. If we're concerned about connectivity at home, these can all really help address those concerns. And then I wanted to make sure that I highlight our other webinars this week. I know I talked about Nearpod and Flipgrid, but coming up actually right after this webinar, there will be a session on talking about cyberbullying. That starts right at 11. If you want to sign up for that, the links to all of these are in this slide deck. From 1 to 2, we have a session on managing online learning and safety using the tool GoGuardian. If you're not familiar with GoGuardian, I would definitely recommend checking that out. From 2 to 3, we have a colleague running an intro session on something called HyperDocs. And then finally, from 3 to 4, we will have an office hours session where we'll be available to answer your questions. We'll have office hours, I believe, most days from 3 to 4, Monday through Thursday this week. And then for all of our PD offerings, including links to those Nearpod and the Flip webinars, you can go to our BPS Summer PD calendar, which is also linked from this slide deck. So I did mention that if you want to sort of continue this conversation, this was really just very much like a 30,000-foot overview of Flipped Classroom. But if you want to spend more time talking about this, I'd love to set up time to talk with you. There's a link right here to my Calendly, which is basically a way for you to book time with me one-on-one. I'm more than happy to continue the conversation. Sarah's Calendly link is also in here. And we've also linked to our BPS Tech help docs, which if you're not familiar with these are great tools to be able to address all manner of tech concerns. And it sort of walks you through sort of troubleshooting a whole variety of different tools. There's some guides here, tutorials, general tips. And then there's a link to our site, our BPS Technology digital learning site. And then these are our Bitmojis in case anyone is interested in seeing those. We're right there. That's our whole team. That's the digital learning team, which is part of the bigger BPS Tech team. And then last but not least, I want to say thank you. Thank you in particular for hanging in during my my tech challenges today. And we also have a link to the feedback forum. We'd love to hear from you. This is actually the first session we've done on Flipped Classroom. So I'd love to hear your feedback, and I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for coming.